Ah, mes amis, tonight we enter Hallowmere Hall, a house of rules, rituals, and perfect silence. Here, every door is opened on time, every candle lit precisely, and every secret carefully kept. But when death enters such a place, it does not announce itself loudly. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it serves tea. Settle in and listen closely, because in this mystery, loyalty may be the deadliest crime of all. Chapter 1. The Perfect Order of Hallowmere Hall. Hallowmere Hall had survived wars, winters, and generations of quiet resentment, without ever appearing to change. From the outside, it stood immaculate, its stone facade washed in pale grey, its tall windows symmetrical to the point of obsession, its iron gates opening and closing with mechanical obedience. Visitors often remarked on its calm, its dignity, its sense of order, but order, as Hercule Poirot well knew, was rarely innocent. Poirot arrived just before dusk, his polished shoes clicking softly against the gravel drive as the sun slipped behind the ancient yew trees. A chill lingered in the air, unnatural for the season, as though the house itself preferred cold restraint over warmth. The door opened before he reached it. "Good evening, Monsieur Poirot." The voice was measured, controlled, perfectly neutral. The man who stood before him was tall, spare, and dressed in immaculate black and white. His posture was rigid, his hands folded neatly behind his back. His face bore no expression that Poirot could identify as welcoming or hostile. It simply was. "I am Edmund Blackwood, the butler of Hallowmere Hall." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Monsieur Blackwood, you anticipated me." The butler's lips moved just enough to suggest acknowledgement. "I anticipate most things, sir." Poirot's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than courtesy required. Something about Blackwood's stillness unsettled him, not stiffness, control, the control of a man who had trained himself never to react. "May I take your coat?" Blackwood asked. Poirot allowed it. As the butler relieved him of his coat, Poirot noticed the man's hands, long fingers, clean nails, steady as marble. Hands that did not tremble, hands that could hold secrets. "This way, please." The entrance hall of Hallowmere Hall was vast and echoing, lit by chandeliers that glowed with restrained elegance. Portraits lined the walls, stern men, pale women, all gazing down as though silently judging those who walked beneath them. Poirot felt it immediately. This house was ruled not by its owners, but by its routines. "You have been summoned," Blackwood said as they walked, "because of an unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate," Poirot repeated gently. "A word that often conceals much." Blackwood did not reply. They entered the drawing room, where a fire crackled low and controlled, as though even flames were expected to behave. 3 people waited. At the center sat Sir Reginald Hallowmere, the master of the house, a man in his early 60s with a proud bearing and tired eyes. His hands rested on a cane he did not truly need. Beside him sat his wife, Lady Margaret Hallowmere, elegant, pale, and rigid with tension. Standing near the window was Clara Hallowmere, their niece, a young woman with anxious eyes and tightly clasped hands. Poirot bowed politely. "I regret that our meeting is born of distress." Sir Reginald gestured weakly. "Please, sit. We were told you are the best." Poirot seated himself carefully. "The best is only useful when the truth wishes to be found." Lady Margaret's eyes flicked briefly to the doorway, where Blackwood now stood silently, almost blending into the wall. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "Last night my secretary, Mr. Arthur Bell, was found dead in the east wing." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Dead?" Lady Margaret's voice was tight. "Poisoned in his study." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the circumstances?" Sir Reginald hesitated. "There were no signs of struggle, no disorder, nothing missing." Poirot's gaze drifted around the room. Everything here felt curated, controlled, maintained. "Who found the body?" Poirot asked. Blackwood spoke before anyone else could. "I did, sir. At precisely 7:30 in the morning, when Mr. Bell failed to appear for breakfast." Poirot turned his head slightly. "You are very precise, Monsieur Blackwood." "I value precision." Poirot smiled faintly. "As do I." Clara spoke suddenly. "Arthur was afraid." Poirot looked at her. "Afraid of what, mademoiselle?" She swallowed. "He said someone was watching him." that he knew too much. Lady Margaret snapped, "Clara, that's enough." Poirot raised a hand gently. "No, madame, it is exactly enough." He turned back to Clara. "Did he say who?" Clara shook her head. "Only that the house had ears." Poirot's gaze slid again to Blackwood. The butler remained unmoved. Sir Reginald sighed heavily. "Arthur handled sensitive matters, financial records, family correspondence?" Poirot nodded. "Secrets?" "Yes," Sir Reginald admitted, "but nothing worth killing for." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Monsieur, people rarely kill for what seems valuable. They kill for what threatens order." Silence settled. Poirot rose slowly. "I should like to see the study." Blackwood bowed slightly. "Of course." As they walked through the long corridors, Poirot observed everything: the silence, the symmetry, the way doors were aligned perfectly, the way even the air felt supervised. "Tell me, Monsieur Blackwood," Poirot said casually, "how long have you served this household?" 32 years, Poirot nodded. "Long enough to know every routine?" "Yes." "Every secret?" Blackwood paused for the briefest moment. "Every permitted secret." Poirot smiled to himself. They reached the east wing. The study door stood open. Inside, the room was immaculate. Papers stacked neatly, desk polished, a teacup rested beside an empty chair. Arthur Bell sat upright at the desk, his expression strangely calm. Too calm. Poirot approached slowly. "No sign of disturbance," Poirot murmured. "A man who died believing order would protect him." Poirot lifted the teacup carefully and inhaled. Bitter almond. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Poison," he said softly, "administered with care." Lady Margaret whispered, "Who could have done this?" Poirot turned, not toward the family, but toward the butler. "Monsieur Blackwood," Poirot said gently, "who prepares the tea in this household?" Blackwood met his gaze evenly. "I do." The room seemed to exhale. Poirot did not accuse. Not yet. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Then, mon ami, we shall begin with you." Blackwood did not flinch. He only bowed his head slightly. "As you wish, Monsieur Poirot." And Poirot understood something chilling. In Hallowmere Hall, obedience was not submission. It was power. Chapter 2. The butler who never trembled. Hallowmere Hall did not like questions. It answered them the way old houses answered storms, with silence, with creaking patience, with the stubborn belief that if it remained still long enough, the disturbance would pass. But Hercule Poirot had built his life on disturbances. He stood in Arthur Bell's study with the teacup held delicately between thumb and forefinger, as if the porcelain might confess under pressure. The bitter almond scent lingered faintly, an aroma that meant more than poison. It meant intention. It meant someone had chosen a method that could be delivered politely, without a raised voice or a broken vase. In short, a murder that belonged to this house. Behind him, Lady Margaret's breathing sounded like controlled outrage. Clara stood near the doorway, pale and rigid, while Sir Reginald leaned on his cane, forcing dignity into a body that looked suddenly older, and at the edge of it all, Edmund Blackwood remained perfectly still. Poirot placed the teacup down as though closing a book. "Monsieur Blackwood," he said gently, "you prepare the tea." "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." "And you delivered it?" Blackwood's eyes did not blink too quickly, nor too slowly. "Tea is delivered by the footman for the east wing. However, I oversee preparation." Poirot nodded. "Ah, so you do not carry the cup, but you direct its existence." Blackwood gave the smallest, most careful pause. "If you prefer." Poirot turned slightly toward Inspector Renier's absence. There was no official authority here yet that felt truly present. This was still a private battlefield, and in private battles, the first advantage belonged to whoever controlled the room. Poirot decided to change the room. "Sir Reginald," he said, "tell me what Mr. Bell did for you." "Precisely." Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "He was my secretary. He handled letters, accounts, arrangements." "Arrangements," Poirot repeated. "That is a word with many pockets." Lady Margaret lifted her chin. "Arthur was discreet." Poirot smiled faintly. Discreet men are often killed by those who cannot risk discretion turning into speech. Clara's voice, small but urgent, slipped into the space. He wanted to leave. Lady Margaret snapped her head toward her. Clara! Poirot raised a hand, gentle but firm. Mademoiselle Clara, you said this yesterday as well. He was afraid. Now you say he wanted to leave. Tell me everything. Clara swallowed. He told me. 2 days ago. He said he'd found something in the records. Something that made him feel sick. He said he couldn't stay here with it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Did he say what he found? Clara shook her head quickly. No, only he said if he left without doing something, he'd be a coward. Lady Margaret's voice was cold. Arthur was melodramatic, Poirot glanced at her, or moral, and morality is inconvenient in a house built on routine. Sir Reginald gripped his cane harder. Monsieur Poirot, you said you would help, not accuse. Poirot's expression softened. I accuse no one yet. I only collect the truth as it falls from people's mouths. He turned toward Blackwood again. Monsieur Blackwood, what did Mr. Bell eat, drink, or touch yesterday evening? Anything unusual? Blackwood's voice remained even. Mr. Bell took his supper in his room at 6. He requested tea afterward. At 7, I saw him briefly in the corridor. Poirot's eyebrows rose. You saw him? Personally? Blackwood nodded once. He asked if I could bring him the red ledger from the office cabinet. He said he required it urgently. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And did you bring it? Yes, Sir Reginald frowned. The red ledger. Blackwood's gaze flicked barely to Sir Reginald. House accounts, sir. Domestic expenditures. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. Domestic expenditures are sometimes the most revealing, especially when they pretend to be boring. Poirot stepped toward the desk. He did not touch the papers. He simply looked. The stacks were too neat for a man who was supposedly frantic. The ink bottle was aligned precisely. The pen rested in a straight line. Poirot murmured, A very tidy death. Lady Margaret frowned. What does that mean? Poirot turned. It means either Mr. Bell was interrupted before he could become disorderly, or someone made him orderly afterward. Clara's eyes widened. You mean someone cleaned up? Poirot nodded. Yes, because Mr. Bell was frightened. A frightened man does not arrange his papers like a librarian. Blackwood's expression did not change, but Poirot noticed something else. Blackwood's breathing remained steady. He did not show the slightest discomfort at the idea of tampering. A man who never trembled. Poirot moved to the cabinet at the side of the room. The keyhole was polished from use. Who holds keys to this study? Poirot asked. Blackwood answered instantly. Myself, Sir Reginald, the housekeeper, and Mr. Bell. Sir Reginald's brows knit. Why would the housekeeper have a key? Blackwood replied smoothly. For cleaning schedules and inventory oversight. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And the footman? Blackwood's voice remained neutral. Footmen do not have keys, they have instructions. Poirot smiled faintly. Instructions are more dangerous than keys. He returned to the teacup. The rim was clean, no lipstick, no stain, no sign of struggle. Poirot's eyes drifted to Arthur Bell's hands, resting neatly on the desk, fingers gently curled. Poirot leaned closer, careful not to touch, studying the fingertips. There, a faint bluish tinge under the nail of the right index finger, subtle, easily missed, like a secret that believed it was safe. Poirot straightened slowly. Monsieur Blackwood, he said softly, who empties the ashtrays and clears the wastebaskets from this wing? Blackwood answered. The housekeeper supervises, the undermaid carries. Poirot nodded. And the red ledger, after Mr. Bell finished with it, where did it go? Blackwood's eyes remained fixed. I returned it to the office cabinet. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Immediately? Yes. Poirot let the word hang in the air like a bell note. Immediately! Lady Margaret's voice grew sharp. What are you implying? Poirot turned to her. That Mr. Bell discovered something in that ledger, something worth fear. And if the ledger returned so quickly, perhaps he never finished reading it. Sir Reginald's face tightened. What could possibly be in a household expense ledger? Poirot smiled politely. Ah, Sir Reginald, in great houses, expenses are often camouflage. The truly important payments are never described honestly. He addressed the room with calm authority. "I wish to see the red ledger." Blackwood bowed. "Of course." They walked together through the corridor. Poirot noted how Blackwood's footsteps made almost no sound, not because of carpet alone, but because the man placed his feet with purpose, trained to move without disturbance. As they passed a mirror, Poirot caught the reflection of Blackwood's face. It was not cruel. It was not kind. It was managed. They reached the office cabinet. Blackwood removed a key from a ring, many keys, each one shining like a small promise of access. He unlocked the cabinet with a movement so practiced it seemed part of his skeleton. He withdrew a thick ledger bound in red leather and handed it to Poirot. Poirot held it, heavy with the weight of routine. He opened it, columns, dates, numbers, seemingly dull. But Poirot did not read like a clerk. He read like a hunter, a pattern, emerged quickly. Weekly payments labeled maintenance, garden supplies, coal delivery. And then one line, recurring but irregular, special services, EB. Poirot's eyes paused on it. He did not look up immediately. He simply turned the page. Special services, EB, appeared again, different amounts, always cash. Poirot finally lifted his gaze. "Monsieur Blackwood," he said gently, "what are special services?" Blackwood's face remained neutral. "Household requirements, monsieur." Poirot tilted his head. "And the initials? EB?" Blackwood did not blink. "My initials." Poirot smiled faintly. "How convenient." Sir Reginald stepped closer, frowning. "Blackwood, what is this?" Blackwood's reply was smooth. "Additional staffing, sir. Occasional security. Private errands." Poirot's voice remained calm, but the words sharpened. "Private errands for whom?" Blackwood met his gaze. "For the house." Poirot nodded slowly. "The house again. Always the house, never the people." He closed the ledger gently. "And Mr. Bell, he discovered these payments and became afraid." Lady Margaret's voice snapped. "Are you accusing Blackwood of embezzlement now?" Poirot shook his head. "Not embezzlement. Something else." He held the ledger again, tapping a line with his finger. "These payments increase before certain events, a dinner, a party, a visit from London. Someone arrives, and special services are required." Clara whispered, "What services?" Poirot glanced toward her kindly. "Services that ensure nothing embarrassing happens." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Blackwood." But Blackwood did not flinch. "Sir, Hallowmere Hall has always required protection from disruption." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And when Mr. Bell threatened disruption by wanting to leave, he died." Lady Margaret's voice rose. "This is absurd." Poirot turned to her. "Is it? Madame, you are frightened, not for Mr. Bell, but for what he might have said." Lady Margaret went pale. Sir Reginald's voice became strained. "Monsieur Poirot, you must understand there are matters, private matters." Poirot nodded. "Yes, matters that require special services." Poirot returned to the study, ledger in hand. He looked again at Arthur Bell's fingers with the bluish tinge beneath the nail. Poirot murmured, "Poison is one method, but I suspect the poison is only the tool, not the motive." He looked at Blackwood. "Monsieur Blackwood, what poison was used?" Blackwood answered evenly. "I am not a chemist." Poirot smiled. "No, but you are a man who knows what ends a conversation quickly." Blackwood's eyes cooled slightly. "Monsieur Poirot, if you believe you can intimidate me," Poirot lifted a hand, gentle. "I intimidate no one. I simply observe." Then Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small handkerchief. He leaned over the desk, not touching the body, only the edge near Arthur Bell's fingertips. With the tip of the handkerchief, Poirot lifted a tiny fragment of something barely visible, a thin paper fiber stained faintly blue. He held it up. "A fragment," Poirot said softly, "from a carbon copy, perhaps, or a blue paper memo, something Mr. Bell tore in a hurry." Blackwood's gaze fixed on the fragment for one heartbeat too long. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "There," Poirot murmured. "You see, you recognize it." Blackwood's mouth tightened. "It is nothing." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Nothing is the favorite disguise of guilt." He turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, did Mr. Bell give you anything? A note? A key? A warning? More specific? Clara hesitated, then reached into her pocket with trembling fingers. He gave me this yesterday evening. She held out a small folded slip of paper. Poirot took it carefully and unfolded it. On it, in hurried handwriting, were only 4 words. The butler knows everything. A silence fell so complete that even the fire seemed to pause. Lady Margaret's face tightened. Sir Reginald's shoulders sagged as if the house had become heavier. Clara looked ready to cry, and Edmund Blackwood, still controlled, immaculate, did not tremble. He only said very quietly, "Miss Clara should not repeat gossip." Poirot's eyes remained steady. "Gossip," he replied softly, "does not usually die of poison, Monsieur Blackwood." He folded the note and placed it into his pocket. "Now," Poirot said, voice gentle and final, "we must ask ourselves, did Mr. Bell write this because he feared you, or because he feared who you serve?" Blackwood's eyes finally shifted, just slightly, toward the corridor, as though listening for someone else. Poirot saw it, and in that small movement, the house spoke louder than words. Hallowmere Hall had a master, but the butler had an allegiance beyond the family. And that allegiance, Poirot knew, would not tolerate curiosity for long. Chapter 3. The door that shouldn't open. Hallowmere Hall had many doors. Some were ceremonial, opened only for guests of importance, their hinges oiled, their handles polished to mirror brightness. Some were practical, used by servants, delivery men, and tradespeople whose presence was tolerated but never celebrated. And then there were the doors no one mentioned at all. Those were the doors Hercule Poirot listened for. He stood alone in the east wing corridor, the red ledger tucked carefully under his arm, the folded note from Clara secured inside his pocket, like a fragile confession. The house was quiet, in the way only disciplined houses could be. No careless footsteps, no doors slammed in irritation, no raised voices drifting from behind walls. Silence here was not absence. It was obedience. Poirot turned slowly, surveying the corridor. The carpet ran straight as a ruler. The portraits were aligned to mathematical precision. Even the air felt arranged, as though disorder were an offense punishable by exile. "Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot turned. Edmund Blackwood stood at the far end of the corridor, hands folded behind his back, posture immaculate. He had not approached loudly. He never did. "You wonder," Blackwood said calmly. "Guests are usually shown where they are meant to be." Poirot smiled faintly. "And investigators, Monsieur Blackwood, where are they meant to be?" Blackwood met his gaze evenly. "Where they are invited." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, then I suspect I have been invited, just not officially." Blackwood did not respond. Poirot gestured gently toward the corridor walls. "Hallowmere Hall is impressive. 32 years of service, you said." "Yes." "Then you know which doors open, and which remain closed." Blackwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Some areas are private." Poirot nodded. "Private is acceptable. Forbidden is more interesting." For a moment, neither man moved. Then Poirot took a step, not toward Blackwood, but past him. Blackwood spoke sharply. "Monsieur Poirot." Poirot stopped, but did not turn. "Yes?" "That wing is not part of your inquiry." Poirot finally faced him. "Monsieur Blackwood, when a man dies in a locked house, every wing becomes part of the inquiry." Blackwood's eyes hardened slightly. "You will find nothing of value there." Poirot smiled politely. "Monsieur, I find value precisely where others insist there is none." He stepped forward again. This time Blackwood did not stop him. The corridor narrowed as Poirot moved deeper into the east wing. The decor subtly changed. Fewer portraits, simpler wallpaper, lamps that burned lower and were cleaned less often. The elegance thinned here, replaced by something older and more functional, service architecture. Poirot slowed. His pace, a faint draught brushed his cheek. He stopped. Old houses breathed through their mistakes. Poorly sealed walls, forgotten passages, doors concealed by design. Poirot followed the sensation with the tip of his fingers along the paneling. There, a seam, barely visible, hidden beneath decorative molding that matched the wall perfectly. Poirot pressed gently. The panel did not move. Poirot smiled to himself. "Of course," He knelt, carefully with dignity, and examined the baseboard. Dust gathered unevenly here, disturbed not by shoes but by frequent handling. Poirot rose, placed his hand flat against the panel, and pushed upward. A click. The wall shifted inward by a few inches, revealing a narrow door, unmarked, unpolished, its hinges dull with age. A door that should not open. Poirot hesitated only a moment, then he stepped inside. The passage beyond was narrow and dim, lit by a single exposed bulb. The air smelled faintly of paper, polish, and something metallic. The walls were brick, not plaster, older than the rest of the house. Poirot's mind raced. Such passages were built for discretion, for movement without observation, for control. He advanced slowly, counting his steps. The passage opened into a small room, a record room. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books but with folders, neatly labeled, dated, categorized. Each shelf bore the marks of obsessive maintenance. Poirot approached the nearest folder. Hall, incident reports, another, staff, disciplinary notes. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He opened one. Inside were handwritten pages, dates, names, observations, not financial records, behavioral records. Mrs. Evans spoke out of turn during dinner service, corrected. Footman Lewis entered West Wing without permission, reassigned. Arthur Bell asked questions regarding special accounts, monitored. Poirot felt a chill. This was not housekeeping. This was surveillance. He flipped pages carefully, his mind absorbing patterns faster than his hands could turn paper. The handwriting was neat, consistent, and unmistakably practiced. Edmund Blackwood's handwriting. Poirot reached the most recent entry. The date was 2 days before Arthur Bell's death. Arthur Bell intends departure. Risk assessment elevated. Poirot closed the folder slowly. So, Arthur Bell had not merely discovered something. He had been assessed. Poirot stepped back, scanning the room again. A small desk stood in the corner, bare except for a ledger and a locked drawer. Poirot examined the lock. Old but well-maintained. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a thin tool, a habit from years of encountering stubborn secrets. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside lay a small wooden box. Poirot opened it. Vials, clear glass, neatly labeled in coded initials. Poirot lifted one carefully. A faint scent reached him. Bitter almond. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Murder, he murmured, administered with discipline. Footsteps sounded behind him. Poirot did not turn. Interesting room, he said calmly. One does not usually associate such thoroughness with domestic service. Blackwood's voice came from the doorway, controlled but sharper than before. You should not be here. Poirot turned slowly. Blackwood stood framed by the open panel door, his immaculate composure now strained by a tightness around the eyes. Still calm, but no longer indifferent. Poirot held up the vial gently. Monsieur Blackwood, how long have you been deciding who belongs in this house? Blackwood's gaze flicked briefly to the shelves, then back to Poirot. I ensure order, he said quietly. Order requires oversight, Poirot nodded. And when oversight fails, Blackwood's voice was flat. Correction is applied. Poirot's eyes hardened. Arthur Bell was corrected. Blackwood took a step forward. Arthur Bell was unstable. Poirot shook his head. He was curious, and curiosity terrifies those who govern in silence. Blackwood's jaw tightened. You misunderstand your position. Poirot smiled faintly. Monsieur, I understand it perfectly. You govern this house, but you do not own the law. Blackwood's eyes glinted. The law does not understand Hallowmere Hall. Poirot's voice sharpened. Nor does it tolerate murder. Blackwood glanced toward the corridor behind him just once. Poirot noticed. Someone else knows of this room, Poirot said softly. Blackwood did not answer. Poirot continued. You are not acting alone. You serve something beyond this family. Blackwood straightened. I serve continuity. Poirot stepped closer. Continuity for whom? A silence fell between them, dense and dangerous. Then Blackwood spoke carefully. There are families whose names must remain untouched. Houses that survive because someone is willing to make difficult decisions. Poirot's gaze was steady. And you have appointed yourself that someone. Blackwood's eyes hardened fully now. I was appointed long before you arrived. Poirot's breath slowed. By whom? Blackwood said nothing. Poirot nodded. Then we have reached the door behind the door. Blackwood's expression darkened. You will leave this room. Poirot held the vial gently but firmly. No! Blackwood's voice dropped. Monsieur Poirot, do not confuse politeness with permission. Poirot smiled sadly. And do not confuse obedience with morality. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then footsteps echoed again, lighter this time. Clara's voice drifted from the corridor. Monsieur Poirot? Blackwood stiffened. Poirot raised his voice slightly. Yes, mademoiselle, I am here. Clara appeared at the doorway, eyes widening as she took in the hidden room. What is this place? She whispered. Poirot met Blackwood's gaze. This, Poirot said gently, is where order becomes tyranny. Blackwood's composure cracked, not visibly, but fundamentally. This room is private, he said sharply. Clara stepped forward, trembling. Arthur was afraid of you. Blackwood's eyes flashed. Arthur should not have spoken to you. Poirot intervened smoothly. He spoke because he feared what would happen if he did not. Poirot turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, did Mr. Bell ever mention this room? Clara nodded slowly. He said, there was a place where mistakes were recorded, where people were judged. Poirot looked back at Blackwood, judged and sentenced. Blackwood's hands clenched behind his back. Poirot spoke softly but with authority. Monsieur Blackwood, you have created a system where you decide who threatens the house. Arthur Bell threatened it by wanting to leave. Blackwood's voice was quiet now. If he left, he would have spoken. Poirot nodded. And you could not allow that? Blackwood lifted his chin. Hallowmere Hall must endure. Poirot's eyes were unwavering. Not at the cost of human life. Clara's voice shook. You killed him. Blackwood did not deny it. He simply said, I preserved order. Poirot exhaled slowly. And now, Poirot said, order has revealed its face. Sir Reginald's voice suddenly echoed from the corridor. What is going on here? Poirot turned as Sir Reginald and Lady Margaret approached, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror as they saw the hidden room. Lady Margaret gasped. Edmund! Sir Reginald's face went pale. This was never meant to exist. Blackwood straightened fully, dignity restored like armor. It existed because you needed it. Poirot nodded gravely. And now, he said, we must decide whether Hallowmere Hall will continue to be ruled by silence or by truth. Blackwood met Poirot's gaze without blinking. You will not stop what has already been set in motion, he said quietly. Poirot replied just as quietly. Then, Monsieur Blackwood, we must hurry. Chapter 4. The House That Chose Silence. Silence did not fall over Hallowmere Hall. It was already there, waiting. When Sir Reginald and Lady Margaret stepped fully into the hidden record room, the weight of decades seemed to settle upon them at once. The shelves, the folders, the neat handwriting, the vials, everything spoke of a system too deliberate to be accidental. Lady Margaret's gloved hand flew to her mouth. My God! Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse. Edmund, what is this place? Edmund Blackwood stood straight-backed, his expression composed once more, though something brittle had replaced the ease of his control. He did not bow, he did not apologize. Instead, he answered as though explaining a household schedule. This is where order was maintained. Poirot watched the exchange carefully. This was no longer a crime scene alone. It was a reckoning. Maintained from what? Poirot asked gently. Blackwood's eyes did not leave Sir Reginald. From scandal, from disgrace, from chaos. Sir Reginald took a step forward, rage and fear battling for dominance. You had no authority to do this, Blackwood replied calmly. I had all the authority. You gave it to me, quietly, conveniently, whenever something needed to disappear. Lady Margaret's eyes widened. Disappear? Blackwood turned to her. Letters misplaced, guests redirected, servants dismissed before they could speak, a ledger adjusted here, a conversation ended there. Poirot interjected softly, and when Arthur Bell wished to leave, his conversation was ended permanently. Clara's breath hitched. Sir Reginald shook his head, voice breaking. "You were meant to protect us." "I did," Blackwood replied. "I protected the house." Poirot stepped closer to the shelves and removed another folder, opening it slowly. "Protection," Poirot said, "is often just another word for possession." He read aloud, "Lady Hallowmere's cousin, London incident, corrected before press involvement." Lady Margaret staggered back. "You knew about that?" Blackwood inclined his head. "Before the newspapers did." Poirot turned another page. "Donation redirected. Minister persuaded. Guest relocated." Poirot closed the folder. This house did not merely choose silence, it outsourced it. The air grew thick. Clara whispered, "So everyone who threatened the family—" Blackwood finished her sentence. "Was managed." Poirot's voice sharpened slightly. "Until management was no longer sufficient." He gestured toward the vial in his hand. "Then came poison." Blackwood did not deny it. Instead, he said something far more chilling. "Arthur Bell was not the first." Lady Margaret let out a stifled cry. Sir Reginald's face went ashen. "How many?" Blackwood paused, not out of guilt, but calculation. "Enough," he said. Poirot's eyes darkened. "Enough for murder to become routine." Poirot placed the vial carefully back on the desk. "You speak of continuity," Poirot said, "but continuity built on fear rots from within. Arthur Bell did not die because he threatened the family. He died because he threatened you." Blackwood's jaw tightened. He was going to expose the system. Poirot nodded. "And systems that cannot survive daylight deserve to collapse." Sir Reginald sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. "All this time, cities, we thought we were safe." Poirot looked at him kindly. "Monsieur, safety bought with silence is only borrowed time," Lady Margaret whispered. "Why didn't you come to us?" Blackwood finally looked away, from Sir Reginald, from Lady Margaret, from Clara. "Because you did not want to know," he said quietly. "You wanted results." Poirot let the words hang. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Monsieur Blackwood, who taught you this system?" Blackwood's eyes flicked upward, toward the ceiling, as though the answer lived in the bones of the house itself. "This did not begin with me," he said. "I inherited it." Poirot's expression sharpened. "From whom?" Blackwood hesitated. Poirot pressed gently. "From the previous butler." "Or from someone higher?" Blackwood's lips thinned. "From those who understood that houses like Hallowmere do not survive by innocence." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then Arthur Bell did not die because he discovered corruption. He died because he discovered the mechanism." Clara's voice trembled. "You murdered him because he wanted to tell the truth." Blackwood met her gaze. "I murdered him because the truth would have destroyed everything." Poirot corrected him quietly. "No, it would have destroyed you." That struck. Blackwood straightened, dignity clinging stubbornly to him. "You will not expose this room," he said. "You will not destroy this house." Poirot stepped closer, his voice calm but absolute. "Monsieur Blackwood, the house has already been destroyed." Sir Reginald looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Poirot gestured around them. "A house that survives only by erasing people is already hollow. It merely hasn't noticed yet." Footsteps echoed from the corridor. Inspector Hale, summoned earlier, appeared with 2 constables, faces hardening as they took in the hidden room. Poirot turned. "Inspector, I believe you will find this relevant." Hale stared at the shelves, the vials, the folders. "My God!" Blackwood did not resist as the constables stepped closer. "This is a mistake," Blackwood said evenly. "You remove me, and the house collapses." Poirot replied softly. "Monsieur Blackwood, the house chose silence for too long. Now it must choose consequence." As Blackwood was escorted away, he turned once, only once, towards Sir Reginald. "I kept you safe," he said. Sir Reginald did not reply. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer obedient, it was ashamed. Poirot stepped into the corridor with Clara beside him. "Will they arrest him?" she asked quietly. Poirot nodded. Yes, but the deeper question is whether the house will confess what it allowed. Clara looked back at the hidden room. And if it doesn't? Poirot's gaze was steady. Then Arthur Bell will not be the last ghost. He turned back toward the drawing room, already thinking ahead. Blackwood was the instrument. But systems like this always answered to someone else, and Poirot knew, deep in his bones, that Chapter 5 would reveal who truly benefited from the silence of Hallowmere Hall. Chapter 5, the silence that benefited someone. Hallowmere Hall did not collapse when Edmund Blackwood was taken away. That, Poirot thought, was the most revealing fact of all. The servants continued their duties with mechanical precision. Breakfast was served on time. Curtains were drawn and undrawn according to schedule. The clocks chimed with unwavering obedience. If anything, the house seemed relieved, like a body that had lost a tumor, yet still remembered the pain. Poirot sat alone in the morning room, sipping coffee and watching the light crawl slowly across the lawn. Silence still ruled the house, but now it was a silence filled with unease rather than authority. Silence, Poirot reflected, always benefits someone. The question was, who? Inspector Hale joined him, a folder tucked under his arm and fatigue written across his face. "We've secured the hidden room," Hale said quietly. "Everything catalogued. Enough there to bury Blackwood twice over." Poirot nodded. "Blackwood buried himself long before we arrived." Hale hesitated. "But you don't believe he was acting alone?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Inspector, systems like that are never built for one man's benefit. They exist because they serve someone who never touches them." Hale frowned. "You think someone above the family?" Poirot stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I think someone beneath their notice." Sir Reginald requested to see Poirot later that morning. They met in the library, a room that smelled of leather, dust, and decisions made long ago. Sir Reginald looked smaller now, as though the removal of Blackwood had stripped away a false spine he had leaned on for decades. "I never ordered him to kill," Sir Reginald said quietly. Poirot nodded. "I believe you." "But I knew," Sir Reginald continued. "I knew he handled things." Poirot leaned forward. "Monsieur, knowing and permitting are not so far apart." Sir Reginald's hands trembled. "Every family has skeletons." Poirot replied gently. "Yes, but only some hire caretakers for them." Sir Reginald sighed heavily. "If Arthur Bell had gone to the police," Poirot interrupted softly, "he intended to leave quietly. That frightened Blackwood because silence only works when everyone agrees to keep it." Sir Reginald swallowed. "Then why kill him?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Because Arthur Bell was not just leaving, he was thinking, and thought is contagious." Sir Reginald looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Poirot reached into his pocket and placed the small torn blue paper fragment on the table. "This," Poirot said, "is from a duplicate memo. Mr. Bell tore it, but not before reading it." Sir Reginald stared. "A memo from whom?" Poirot smiled thinly. "That is what I wish to know." The servants' quarters told a different story from the grand rooms. Here the air was heavier, the walls closer, the conversations quieter. Poirot walked slowly among them, his presence met with careful politeness and hidden curiosity. Mrs. Grant, the housekeeper, met him in the corridor, her posture stiff with years of discipline. "You wish to speak to the staff?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," Poirot replied. "Individually." Her lips thinned. "They are shaken." Poirot nodded. "Shaken people speak truth accidentally." Mrs. Grant hesitated, then nodded and complied. One by one, Poirot spoke with the servants. A footman who mentioned envelopes that never went through the post, a maid who cleaned rooms that were already clean, a cook who noticed meals prepared for guests who never arrived. Patterns emerged. Poirot did not ask about Blackwood. He asked about instructions. "Who told you to do this? Who approved that? Who benefited?" And again the same answer appeared, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. "Mr. Ashcroft." "Mr. Lionel Ashcroft." Poirot paused when he heard the name. Ashcroft, he knew it, not as a member of the household, but as a name attached to trusts, estates, and legal guardianships. Poirot thanked the staff politely and returned to the library, his mind assembling the pieces with quiet efficiency. Lionel Ashcroft arrived that afternoon. He was everything Blackwood was not. Polished, charming, public. Ashcroft was Sir Reginald's cousin and legal advisor, a man who managed trusts, handled disputes, and represented the family interests in London. He wore grief convincingly and concern like a tailored coat. "My dear Poirot," Ashcroft said warmly, shaking his hand. "A dreadful business." Poirot smiled politely. "Yes, dreadful for those who did not see it coming." Ashcroft chuckled lightly. "You investigators always suspect everyone." Poirot tilted his head. "Only those who benefit." Ashcroft laughed again. "Benefit? From a secretary's death?" Poirot gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit." Ashcroft obliged. Crossing his legs comfortably, Poirot spoke calmly. "Mr. Bell discovered irregularities in the household accounts." Ashcroft waved dismissively. "Domestic errors. Blackwood handled finances locally." Poirot nodded. "Under your supervision." Ashcroft's smile tightened. "I oversee many things." Poirot leaned forward. "Including trusts that would have been challenged had certain documents become public." Ashcroft's eyes flickered, just once, Poirot noticed. "Arthur Bell was preparing to leave," Poirot continued, "and take copies." Ashcroft scoffed. "Speculation." Poirot placed the red ledger on the table and opened it to the marked pages. "Special Services, E.B." Poirot tapped the page. "Approved by whom?" Ashcroft's voice remained calm. "Security expenses." Poirot smiled. "Security for what?" Ashcroft leaned back. "For discretion." Poirot nodded slowly. "Discretion that protected financial arrangements you managed?" Ashcroft's gaze hardened. "Blackwood acted independently." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Blackwood acted with confidence. Confidence requires assurance." Ashcroft's tone cooled. "Are you accusing me of ordering murder?" Poirot shook his head gently. "No, I accuse you of creating a system where murder was inevitable." Ashcroft rose abruptly. "This is outrageous." Poirot did not move. "Mr. Ashcroft, you benefited most from the silence of Hallowmere Hall." Ashcroft stared at him. "You have no proof." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not yet." Ashcroft turned toward the door. "Then I suggest you find some." Poirot replied softly. "I already have." Ashcroft paused. Poirot continued. "The duplicate memo Mr. Bell read was from your office, blue paper, carbon copy. It listed contingencies if certain documents surfaced." Ashcroft's jaw tightened. "You underestimated Mr. Bell," Poirot said. "You thought him timid, but he was moral, and morality is unpredictable." Ashcroft's voice was sharp now. "Blackwood went too far." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but only after years of encouragement." Ashcroft stared at him, eyes cold. "You cannot prove intent." Poirot met his gaze. "Intent is written in systems, not signatures." Ashcroft left without another word. That evening, Poirot stood with Clara near the garden terrace. "Do you think he ordered it?" she asked quietly. Poirot considered. "No." Clara frowned. "Then why is he responsible?" Poirot replied gently. "Because he designed the silence that allowed it." She looked toward the house. "And now?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Now the silence has a witness." Clara shivered. "Will justice come?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, but not dramatically." She looked at him. "Is that enough?" Poirot's gaze softened. "It must be." Inside the house, Hallowmere Hall creaked, not in obedience, but in discomfort. The silence that once protected it had begun to speak, and in that speech lay the beginning of its undoing. Chapter 6. The Butler was not the master. The arrest of Edmund Blackwood changed the temperature of Hallowmere Hall, but not its atmosphere. If anything, the house grew colder. The servants moved with uncertainty now, their routines intact, but their confidence shaken. Doors still opened on time, meals were still served precisely, yet something essential had been removed. like a spine pulled from a body that continued to walk through habit alone. Poirot noticed everything. He noticed the pauses before instructions were followed, the glances exchanged when Lionel Ashcroft's name was mentioned, the way silence now felt directionless. This was not the silence of control, it was the silence of waiting. Poirot stood in the library again, watching Inspector Hale review documents pulled from the hidden record room. The shelves of power had been dismantled, but their consequences lingered in every room. "You were right," Hale said finally. "Blackwood wasn't the architect, he was the mechanism." Poirot nodded. "Mechanisms do not invent themselves," Hale leaned back. "Ashcroft's lawyers are already circling. He denies everything." Poirot smiled faintly. "Of course he does. Men like Mr. Ashcroft believe distance is immunity." Hale frowned. "But belief isn't evidence." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "No, but patterns are." That afternoon, Poirot requested a full inventory of correspondence handled by Arthur Bell during his final 6 months at Hallowmere Hall. Sir Reginald looked weary, but complied. "If this must be done," he said quietly, "then let it be done thoroughly." Poirot met his gaze kindly. "Monsieur, thoroughness is the only apology truth accepts." The boxes were brought out, letters tied neatly with string, envelopes sorted by date, carbon copies filed with obsessive care. Arthur Bell had been methodical, too methodical to be careless. Poirot began with the most recent files. He read slowly, not for content alone, but for rhythm, for the way information moved, for what repeated and what disappeared. Patterns emerged quickly, letters drafted but never sent, replies received, without records of outgoing correspondence, instructions arriving from London, bypassing the family entirely. Poirot murmured, "He was being managed." Hale looked up. "By Ashcroft?" Poirot nodded. "Indirectly, always indirectly." Poirot pulled one letter free, a carbon copy dated 3 weeks before Bell's death. It was addressed to a trust office in London requesting clarification on a property reallocation. Poirot read the margin notes carefully. In Arthur Bell's hand, "Approved verbally, no written confirmation." Poirot tapped the paper. "A lawyer who refuses to confirm in writing is a lawyer who fears memory." Hale leaned closer. "Ashcroft." "Yes." Poirot decided it was time to remove the final illusion. That evening he asked that Lionel Ashcroft be invited, not summoned, to dinner. Ashcroft arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably, confidence restored by the belief that he remained untouchable. He greeted Sir Reginald warmly, expressed sympathy once more, and accepted a glass of wine as though nothing had changed. Poirot watched him closely. Ashcroft was comfortable, too comfortable. Dinner was served. Conversation flowed politely. Ashcroft spoke of London, of legal matters, of unfortunate misunderstandings. Lady Margaret listened stiffly. Clara remained silent. Poirot allowed the rhythm to settle. Then gently, he disrupted it. "Mr. Ashcroft," Poirot said conversationally, "do you believe loyalty is something one can outsource?" Ashcroft smiled. "Loyalty?" "Yes," Poirot continued. "For example, to a butler." Ashcroft laughed lightly. "I think loyalty is best left to family." Poirot nodded. "And servants." Ashcroft sipped his wine. "Servants follow instructions." Poirot smiled. "Exactly." The table grew quiet. Poirot continued calmly. "Arthur Bell followed instructions too, until he found something that troubled his conscience." Ashcroft's smile thinned. "Arthur Bell was not my responsibility." Poirot inclined his head. "No, he was your convenience." Ashcroft set his glass down carefully. "You are dancing around an accusation, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot met his gaze. "No, monsieur. I am circling a truth." Poirot reached into his pocket and placed a folded document on the table. "This," Poirot said, "is a contingency memorandum." Ashcroft did not touch it. Poirot continued. "It outlines steps to be taken should certain financial arrangements become vulnerable." Sir Reginald frowned. "What arrangements?" Poirot answered gently. "The kind that collapse if exposed." Ashcroft's voice hardened. "I've done nothing illegal." Poirot nodded. "Legality is not morality," Ashcroft snapped. "Blackwood went too far." Poirot smiled sadly. "Blackwood went exactly as far as the system allowed." Ashcroft rose abruptly. "This is absurd. I will not be interrogated at my cousin's table." Poirot spoke softly, but with finality. "You will be questioned, Mr. Ashcroft. The only uncertainty is how publicly." Ashcroft froze. Poirot continued. "Arthur Bell was preparing copies. Copies that would have gone to authorities beyond your influence." Ashcroft's eyes flickered. "You have no proof," Poirot replied gently. "I have motive, I have pattern, and I have a dead man who wanted out." Ashcroft stared at him. For the first time, confidence cracked. "You think removing Blackwood changes anything?" Ashcroft said quietly. "Men like me survive scandals." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but systems do not survive. Exposure." Ashcroft's voice dropped. "You will destroy this family," Poirot replied calmly. "No, monsieur. The family allowed itself to be protected by a man who believed murder was maintenance." Sir Reginald stood abruptly. "Enough!" Ashcroft turned to him. "Reginald, you know I only acted in your interest." Sir Reginald's voice shook. "You acted in yours." The silence that followed was no longer obedient, it was judgmental. Ashcroft left without another word. Later that night, Poirot walked with Clara through the garden. "The butler wasn't the master," she said quietly. Poirot nodded. "No, he was the gatekeeper." "And Ashcroft?" Poirot paused. "He is something more dangerous." Clara frowned. "More dangerous than a murderer." Poirot met her gaze. "A man who convinces others to murder for him." She shivered. "Will he be punished?" Poirot looked toward the house. "He will lose what protects him, distance." Clara whispered. "Is that justice?" Poirot answered honestly. "It is the beginning of it." Inside Hallowmere Hall, a clock struck 10. The sound echoed differently now, not as order, but as countdown. Poirot knew the next chapter would not be about secrets, it would be about consequences, because when the master hides behind the servant, eventually the servant falls, and the master must finally step into the light. Chapter 7, The Confession That Wasn't Spoken. Confessions, Poirot had learned, were overrated. People imagined them as dramatic moments, voices breaking, tears falling, guilt pouring out in a torrent of words. But in reality, the most important confessions were rarely spoken at all. They revealed themselves instead through hesitation, through carefully chosen silences, through the things a person refused to deny. Hallowmere Hall was full of such silences now. The morning after Lionel Ashcroft's abrupt departure, the house felt suspended, caught between exposure and denial. No one mentioned his name aloud, yet it lingered in every corridor like a draught from an open door no one dared close. Poirot stood in the breakfast room, observing. Lady Margaret picked at her food without appetite. Sir Reginald stared into his tea as though hoping it might offer absolution. Clara sat stiffly, her gaze moving from face to face, searching for something that resembled honesty. Poirot waited. He always waited. Eventually, Lady Margaret spoke. "Do you think he'll return?" Poirot answered calmly. "No, madame." Sir Reginald looked up sharply. "You sound certain." Poirot nodded. "Because men who rely on distance never return to places where distance collapses." A silence followed. Sir Reginald finally asked the question he had avoided for days. "What happens now?" Poirot folded his hands. "Now, monsieur, the house must decide what it wishes to confess without being asked." Inspector Hale arrived shortly before noon, carrying a new folder, thinner than the others, but heavier in consequence. "We've traced the contingency memo," Hale said quietly. "Ashcroft's office drafted it. Bell made notes in the margins, questions, requests for clarification." Poirot nodded. "And the responses?" Hale exhaled. "None. Everything verbal, everything deniable." Poirot smiled faintly. "A man does not refuse to write unless he fears what writing becomes." Hale hesitated. "But there's still no direct order tying Ashcroft to the murder." Poirot met his gaze. "Inspector, when a system encourages murder, the absence of an order is the order." Hale leaned against the table. "That won't hold up in court," Poirot replied gently. "No, but it will hold up under pressure." That pressure came sooner than expected. By mid-afternoon, Lionel Ashcroft's London office had sent a representative, Mr. Edwin Crowley, a junior partner with practiced politeness and nervous eyes. Crowley requested a private meeting with Sir Reginald. Poirot insisted on being present. Crowley sat stiffly, papers aligned before him, hands folded too tightly. "My firm represents Mr. Ashcroft," he began. "We are concerned about certain misunderstandings." Poirot tilted his head. "Misunderstandings often occur when truth is rationed," Crowley swallowed. "Mr. Ashcroft regrets the death of Mr. Bell." Poirot nodded. "Regret is easy when consequences are theoretical." Crowley continued, "My client wishes to assure the family that any irregularities were administrative, handled locally." Poirot leaned forward. "Locally, by a butler?" Crowley's eyes flicked downward. Poirot noticed. "Mr. Crowley," Poirot said softly, "have you ever met Edmund Blackwood?" Crowley hesitated. "Briefly." Poirot smiled faintly. "Did you know he reported to your client directly?" Crowley stiffened. Poirot continued, "Monthly summaries, behavioral assessments, risk indicators." Crowley's face drained of color. Poirot placed a folder on the table, copies of the hidden room records. "These were not household documents," Poirot said. "They were intelligence reports." Crowley whispered, "That's impossible." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Then why do they mirror the structure of your firm's private risk evaluations?" Crowley stared at the papers, then at Sir Reginald, then at Poirot. "You don't understand," Crowley said weakly. "Ashcroft believed he was preventing scandals, lawsuits, ruin." Poirot nodded. "And when prevention failed?" Crowley closed his eyes. Poirot did not press further. He did not need to. That evening, Poirot requested to speak with Sir Reginald alone. They met in the study, the same room where Arthur Bell had died. The desk had been cleared now, the teacup removed, yet the room still carried a residue of finality. "I enabled this," Sir Reginald said quietly. Poirot nodded. "Yes." Sir Reginald flinched. "You don't soften it," Poirot replied gently. "No, because softness is how this survived." Sir Reginald swallowed. "Ashcroft told me Blackwood was necessary." Poirot's eyes were kind but firm. "Monsieur, necessity is the word people use when they do not wish to say cowardice." Sir Reginald bowed his head. "What should I do?" he asked. Poirot answered without hesitation. "Tell the truth, not selectively, not elegantly, fully." Sir Reginald looked up. "It will ruin us." Poirot shook his head. "It will free you. Ruin only comes from what remains hidden." Sir Reginald closed his eyes. "Arthur Bell deserved better," Poirot replied softly. "He deserved to leave." Meanwhile, Clara made a discovery of her own. In Arthur Bell's former room, now sealed but not yet cleared, she found a small envelope tucked behind a loose panel in the writing desk. Inside was not money, not documents, but a list, names, dates, short observations. Clara brought it to Poirot with trembling hands. "These are people who left," she said. "Servants, guests. One name is crossed out." Poirot examined the list carefully. Arthur Bell's handwriting. "He was preparing testimony," Poirot said quietly. "Not documents, witnesses," Clara whispered. "He was building a case." Poirot nodded. "And that is why he died." That night, Poirot confronted the last silence. Inspector Hale arranged a formal interview with Lionel Ashcroft, this time under caution. Ashcroft arrived looking tired, his charm dulled but intact. "You have nothing on me," Ashcroft said calmly. Poirot nodded. "Nothing you can be arrested for yet." Ashcroft smiled thinly. "Then why am I here?" Poirot placed Arthur Bell's witness list on the table. "Because Mr. Bell was going to speak," Poirot said. "And because the people on this list are already speaking." Ashcroft's smile faltered. Poirot continued gently. "You never told Blackwood to kill. You only made it clear that failure was unacceptable." Ashcroft leaned back. "You can't prove intent." Poirot met his gaze. "No, but I can prove influence." Ashcroft laughed softly. Influence isn't a crime. Poirot replied quietly. No, but it is responsibility. Ashcroft stood. This conversation is over. Poirot did not stop him. He simply said, Mr. Ashcroft, when the truth comes out, it will not accuse you of murder. Ashcroft paused. Poirot finished. It will accuse you of designing one. Ashcroft left without another word. Later, Poirot stood alone in the garden once more, the house looming behind him. Inspector Hale joined him. He didn't confess. Poirot smiled faintly. Of course not. Hale frowned. Then what have we achieved? Poirot gestured toward the house. We have removed the illusion that silence equals safety, Hale sighed. That won't satisfy everyone, Poirot replied calmly. Justice rarely satisfies, it instructs. The wind stirred the trees. The house creaked, not in obedience, but in surrender. Poirot knew the end was approaching, not with a shouted confession, but with consequences unfolding, quietly, inevitably. Because some truths did not need to be spoken aloud, they only needed to be understood. Chapter 8, When Silence Finally Speaks. Silence did not break at Hallowmere Hall with a sound. It broke with movement. Drawers were opened that had not been touched in years. Letters were taken from hiding places behind false backs of cabinets. Old servants, long dismissed, quietly relocated, or encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere, began to answer questions they had learned never to ask themselves. And with each small act of courage, the silence that had ruled the house for decades began to speak. Hercule Poirot watched it happen, not from the center, but from the edges, where truth often surfaced first. He sat in the winter garden, notebook closed, listening more than speaking, allowing the house to confess in its own reluctant way. Inspector Hale joined him with a tired but satisfied expression. The first former footman came forward this morning, Hale said. Then a maid, then a driver. All the same story? Poirot nodded. Instructions without signatures, Hale exhaled. And consequences without witnesses. Poirot's eyes remained gentle but alert, until now. Clara Hallowmere became the unlikely catalyst. Where others hesitated out of fear or habit, Clara acted out of exhaustion. She was tired of living inside a house that expected obedience instead of honesty, tired of inherited silence, tired of ghosts. She requested a meeting with the remaining senior staff. They gathered in the servants' hall, a room rarely used now, its long table polished but cold, like a courtroom that had forgotten its purpose. Clara stood at the head of the table. I know what this house has done, she said quietly, and I know many of you were told you had no choice. Murmurs rippled. She continued, voice steady. But Arthur Bell believed silence was killing this family, and he died because he refused to carry it any longer. The room went still. Mrs. Grant, the housekeeper, spoke first. We were told it was necessary. Clara nodded. So was he. A young maid spoke, trembling. If we speak, will we be blamed? Poirot stepped forward then, not as an authority but as assurance. You will not be blamed for surviving, he said gently, only for choosing silence now. Something shifted. The first confession was not dramatic. A cook admitted to preparing meals for guests who never arrived. A driver admitted to transporting sealed envelopes instead of people. A footman admitted to being paid to forget. Each confession was small. Together, they formed a pattern too large to deny. Poirot listened, and with every word, the shape of the system grew clearer. That afternoon, Inspector Hale received confirmation from London. Lionel Ashcroft's firm had begun distancing itself, quietly removing his name from documents, placing him on leave pending review. Not because they had found proof of murder, but because risk had entered the equation. Poirot smiled faintly when he heard the news. Power retreats when it is exposed, he said, even before it is punished. Hale frowned. He's still free, Poirot nodded. Yes, for now. But he designed this, Hale insisted. Shouldn't that count for something? Poirot replied calmly. It will, just not theatrically. Sir Reginald made his confession that evening, not to police, to the house. He gathered everyone, family and staff alike, in the great hall. Chandeliers glowed softly above them, no longer symbols of authority but witnesses. "I allowed this," Sir Reginald said, voice breaking. "I told myself it was protection. I told myself it was tradition." He looked at Clara. "It was cowardice." The word echoed. Lady Margaret wept quietly. Poirot watched, unmoving. Confessions that mattered were never about guilt alone. They were about responsibility. Sir Reginald continued, "Arthur Bell trusted me, and I failed him." Poirot felt the weight of it, not as satisfaction, but as closure approaching. That night, Poirot reviewed Arthur Bell's list again. Names had been crossed out, not because they were irrelevant, but because they were already lost, people removed from the system before they could threaten it. Poirot tapped the page thoughtfully. Bell had not been reckless. He had been methodical. "He wasn't gathering proof," Poirot murmured. "He was gathering people." Inspector Hale nodded slowly. "Witnesses?" "Yes, a chorus because one voice is easy to silence," Hale sighed. "And now," Poirot smiled faintly, "now the chorus is singing." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A former junior clerk from Ashcroft's firm contacted the police anonymously. She brought copies, emails printed before deletion, memos rewritten to remove context. A risk assessment labeled simply Domestic Oversight Protocol. Poirot read the documents carefully. Nowhere did they say kill, but they said something worse. Escalate if containment fails, remove destabilizing elements. Preserve continuity at all costs. Poirot closed the folder. "This," he said softly, "is the confession that was never spoken." Inspector Hale finally asked the question he had been holding back. "Do you ever wish it ended differently, with a clear villain, a clear arrest?" Poirot considered this. "No," he said, "because this is closer to truth." Hale frowned. "Truth isn't neat." Poirot nodded. "And yet, it is complete." Lionel Ashcroft was questioned again. This time he arrived without confidence. Not broken, but diminished. He listened as the documents were placed before him. He said nothing. Poirot watched closely. Ashcroft did not deny them. He did not explain them. He simply sat. Finally, Poirot spoke. "Mr. Ashcroft, do you know why Arthur Bell frightened you?" Ashcroft looked up, eyes tired. "Because he didn't understand discretion." Poirot shook his head gently. "Because he understood conscience." Ashcroft closed his eyes. Poirot continued, "You never intended to kill, but you created a system where killing became logical," Ashcroft whispered. "I was preventing chaos," Poirot replied softly. "You were manufacturing it, quietly." Ashcroft said nothing more, and that was enough. The house slept differently that night. Not peacefully, but honestly. Doors creaked without correction. Footsteps echoed unevenly. Lights were left on accidentally. Imperfection returned. Poirot stood once more at the gates of Hallowmere Hall, suitcase in hand. Clara joined him. "It's not over," she said. Poirot smiled. "No, but it has begun." She hesitated. "Will the house survive?" Poirot looked back at the stone facade, weathered, scarred, but standing. "Yes," he said, "because now it must." As he walked away, the wind moved through the trees, not as a whisper of obedience, but as something freer. Silence had finally spoken, and in doing so it had lost its power. Early morning light hitting the exterior of an old manor, windows open, sense of renewal and unease combined, cinematic realism. 16-9. Chapter 10, The House That Learned to Breathe. Hallowmere Hall did not change overnight. That was perhaps the most honest thing about it. The walls still stood heavy with memory. The corridors still echoed with footsteps long gone. The portraits still watched in silence, their painted eyes holding centuries of judgment and pride. But something fundamental had shifted. Something that could not be polished away or instructed into place. The house had lost its overseer, and in that absence it began, slowly, awkwardly, to breathe. Hercule Poirot returned once more to the great hall, not as an investigator now, but as a witness to an ending. His suitcase rested by his side, untouched. He wanted to observe this final moment without hurry. Servants moved freely for the first time, not chaotically, not rebelliously, but naturally. A maid laughed softly near. The staircase then froze, startled by the sound of her own voice. A footman paused before adjusting a painting, hesitated, then did so without asking permission. Even the clocks, once synchronized to the second, were slightly out of step. Imperfection had returned. Poirot smiled. Freedom, he knew, often looked like disorder to those who had mistaken control for virtue. Sir Reginald entered quietly, his posture less rigid than before. He no longer carried his cane like a symbol of authority, but like a necessity he did not resent. "You're leaving?" Sir Reginald said. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, monsieur, my work here is finished." Sir Reginald hesitated. "I don't know how to thank you." Poirot's expression was gentle. "Then do not thank me. Correct what remains." Sir Reginald nodded. "We've released full statements. The trusts are restructured. Ashcroft's influence gone." Poirot raised an eyebrow slightly. "And the house?" Sir Reginald looked around. "The house will have to learn." Poirot smiled. "So must people." Lady Margaret joined them, her elegance softened by exhaustion. "I hated the silence," she admitted quietly. "But I feared what would happen if it ended." Poirot nodded. "Silence is comforting when it protects us from ourselves." She looked down. "Arthur Bell believed differently," Poirot replied softly. "Yes, and that belief cost him his life." Lady Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "I will never forgive myself." Poirot did not contradict her. Forgiveness, he knew, was not something detectives distributed. Clara arrived last. She looked different now, not older but steadier, like someone who had stepped out of a shadow and discovered she could stand without leaning on walls. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said. Poirot smiled warmly. "I am glad." She hesitated. "Do you think Arthur Bell knew he would die?" Poirot considered the question carefully. "No," he said at last. "I think he believed he would be stopped, but he hoped that even stopping him would reveal the truth." Clara swallowed. "Then he succeeded." Poirot nodded. "Yes, in the only way that mattered." The final reckoning did not come with an arrest, it came with acknowledgement. A formal inquiry cited systemic abuse of authority. Testimonies were entered into record. Ashcroft resigned quietly, his reputation dissolving not in scandal but in absence. No speeches were made, no apologies accepted. The world simply adjusted, like a body correcting posture after years of strain. Inspector Hale met Poirot at the gates as the car waited. "You know," Hale said, "this won't satisfy everyone." Poirot smiled faintly. "Justice rarely does." Hale frowned. "People like Ashcroft walk free." Poirot met him. His gaze, "Free of power, that is not nothing." Hale considered this. "And Blackwood?" Poirot's voice was calm. "He will face the law directly. He chose the final action." Hale nodded slowly. "And the house?" Poirot turned back toward Hallowmere Hall. "The house," he said, "will remember." As Poirot prepared to leave, he took one last walk through the corridors. He passed the study where Arthur Bell had died. The room was empty now, clean but no longer sterile. A window stood open, letting in air that disturbed the papers on the desk. Poirot paused. "Monsieur Bell," he murmured quietly, "you were right. Silence kills, but truth, it lingers." He closed the door gently behind him. At the gates, Clara stopped him once more. "Will you ever return?" she asked. Poirot smiled. "I hope not." She laughed softly. "Is that rude?" "No," Poirot replied. "It means the house no longer needs me." She nodded, understanding. As the car pulled away, Hallowmere Hall receded into the distance, not as a monument to control, but as a structure learning its own weight. The wind moved freely through the trees now, not carrying orders, not carrying fear, just air. Later, Poirot reflected on the case as the countryside rolled past. The butler had been sinister, yes, but he had not been the heart of the darkness. The true crime was quieter. It was the belief that order mattered more than life. That silence was preferable to truth, that systems absolved individuals. Arthur Bell had challenged that belief. And though he had paid dearly, his challenge had succeeded. Poirot adjusted his tie thoughtfully. Moral courage, he murmured, is rarely rewarded in life, but it reshapes the world for those who remain. Hallowmere Hall stood alone as night fell. Lights glowed. Softly, not evenly, not perfectly. A window was left open upstairs. Somewhere inside, someone made a decision without asking permission. The house creaked, not in obedience, but in adjustment, and for the first time in generations, Hallowmere Hall slept without supervision.